Welcome back. This is actually the second time I'm making this Stockfish Teaches video. The first one was about 20 minutes long. It was getting a little bit repetitive. It looks like by move 7 or 6, you do most of the same moves. Right now I'm doing more of beginner videos, how to get the right setups. This should get you to move 6 with getting all of the Stockfish moves, or getting pretty close. If not the Stockfish move, I'm sure it's number 2 or at most number 3, but in the end, you're probably going to be either even or better off than your opponent. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. Okay, this is going to be the setup. This is what you'll want to memorize. And then most of the time, you're going to move the knight over here and up there, reposition it. The knights are going to be like on these two squares. Just keep in mind, most of the time, you will want to migrate that knight over. So this is what you would call the Giuoco Pianissimo, the very quiet game. No one's really attacking. We're getting just like white's getting their setup, we're getting our setup. It's just small moves to improve your position. And I'm sure is around like 7 or 8, move 8. You actually get into some of the attacking. But for the most part, you just want to stay on your side of the board and just make those small improvements. A couple of variations that you'll see when getting into it. So to get into this variation, we do our normal e4, e5, knight out, then bringing up their bishop, Italian game. We bring up our knight. We do all these moves anyway. But what really triggers the Giuoco Pianissimo is them moving that pawn up, like closing out the bishop. This is really what triggers this variation. So just keep that in mind. Keep an eye on what your opponent is doing and watch for their threats. So but in this situation, there's very little threats that they can do against you without really losing terribly. So we're both, them, white and black, are just moving their pieces to the most optimal squares, the best squares for these pieces. So as soon as they move the pawn up, we go into it with the bishop up there on c5. What's funny is I was doing the research into the most common moves and still try and go for this fried liver type attack. And when they try and do this fried liver attack and with your bishop already out, it doesn't quite work. And so if they try to do a fried liver in this position, just go ahead, castle. They can take the pawn. You can recapture there. They'll probably take your rook, and then you would take the bishop. Very equal material, but in the end, you will be up. Like, you'll have the better position. So don't fear it. Then we can go on to the next variation. So most of the time you'll see these same setups over and over again. Like in this situation, this is part of their castle variation, what I'm calling castle variation. It's when they castle on move 5. So it's a good idea to know which move you're on, so you know kind of what subset that you're going to be playing. So like we have what I call like the castle variation, the bishop to g5 variation, where they come out here. knight c3 variation, and then even just like the c3 variation. All of these moves are commonly played, and it's good to know what to do against these. But anyways, they castle. You just play your h6, or I mean not h6, but d6, and again you're just getting into your normal position. And then after they castle, and if they move the knight out, which they often do, that will trigger one of the more rare responses. Instead of moving this knight over and to join the other knight on the other side of the board, you actually just move your knight up here to attack the bishop. And whatever they do with the bishop, I would just take. So if they leave it there, I would just take it. If they move it back a square, I would just take it. They're pretty much, whether you take it or leave it, whatever happens, like, it's pretty much the same advantage that white has versus black. I think it's good for us if we take pieces off the board, try and create some imbalance to the game. I think that favors black a little bit more. And so this is the only variation that I know of where we would actually take the knight out to attack the bishop. But that is an idea in this. So I would just try and remember, if they castle on move 5 and then move the knight up, just attack the bishop. That would be my plan. And it's what Stockfish recommends. So hope it's your plan too. Then we move on to the next variation. So this is where they actually bring out the bishop. And they have pretty much 3 or 4 different options. They can move the bishop back, they can move it to this square, or they can bring it back to d2. If they just move it to this square to face off with your bishop, the best move technically is to move it back a square, but the close second move, which is almost identical, is just to take the bishop. They would double up their pawns on this file, and that's actually still good for you. And I would say, yeah, just go for it. Just take the bishops off, and continue your game. That would be my recommendation. But whenever they bring the bishop out, you always challenge it. Bring that pawn up, and sometimes they'll bring it back here. If they do, just move the pawn up to d6, and maybe in move 7 or 8, you can think about hitting it with the other pawn, forcing the bishop over to the square. That's for probably a future video. Just trying to make sure that we know some of the general ideas of this variation, and so like when we play it, we don't completely butcher it. Hopefully we don't. A lot of people, especially in my rating range, would get too aggressive, and they would just like try and get their knight infiltrated, just bring out their bishop right away, and just like in the previous, like the most common variation, below 2000, where they try and do the fried liver type attack. So just try and have patience with this. I'll go over future variations, maybe even as I play them in my daily games. And if you watch my daily games, you'll see me probably struggle with all of these variations and all the lessons that I do making these videos. It's primarily for me to learn how to do these different variations. So I hope you get some benefit out of it. Last variation. So pawn up, bishop out. Again, of our normal setups. And this is one of the more popular moves too. I call this, and I think it's actually known as like a Ponziani type attack, at least in some places. But this is the Ponziani type move, is moving that pawn up. So I would just call this the Ponziani variation. There's, most of the time, they move this pawn up with ideas of pushing that pawn down at the right time. Like probably if you move your knight or lose control a little bit of that square, then they'll try and take advantage of it. Because when they move the pawn up, they got the knight, the pawn, the queen, all facing that square. And they might even have ideas of putting the bishop there in order to support this pawn push up. And if you take, they could also get another pawn in here. So they could end up taking control of the center. And that's the idea with a lot of them. But there's also another idea that you need to be aware of. And we would just close that off there. And they also have another idea of attacking that bishop. And really, there's only one move. Got to pull it back. And if they're going to move that pawn up to here, they're probably going to continue on with the pawn storm on that side of the board. And in that case, you would just respond with the pawn up. They'll probably attack here. And again, you just move your knight up here with it going to its home out on that g6. So hopefully me going through these different variations will help you. I know it hopefully will help me in my games. Just try and remember this setup with the ideas of knight going here and up here. Just remember the only time that I know of where you should put your knight on that a5 square is when they castle on move 5 and then immediately put their knight, bring their knight out. Then Stockfish gives its blessings on moving the knight up to attack the bishop. This particular pawn move would be one of the last moves that you would make. You can even think of the setup like this, but in many cases, moving the pawn up to a6 is going to be one of the top moves. So that's why I kept it in here. This should get you to probably move 7 or 8 even in this particular game. We'll make more videos, especially on specific variations like that Ponziani type variation or the bishop attack variation, all these different ones when the time seems to warrant it. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next Stockfish Teaches series.